Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. This is John Bona. I would like to speak to you today not only on the building of a Judeo-Christian nation, but the rebuilding of the same. Now, there is no doubt in the minds of anyone who has studied historically the issue that our forefathers built our nation upon Judeo-Christian principles. In the past decades, there have been those who have worked very hard to tear it down and to destroy the foundations that America was built upon. But the good news is there is a renewed interest and desire on the part of millions in this country to see it rebuilt again. Today we see all the ancient landmarks made by our forefathers in this religious, political, and economic arenas obscured or forgotten, or being ridiculed right in our faces by the liberal, anti-God establishment. Now, most churchmen have retreated, but say, well, God's in control, and we know who wins in the end anyway. Others desire to fight, but really do not understand what they're trying to conserve. Well, let's remember that an intelligent conservative needs to know what he's attempting to conserve. Now, do we believe with our forefathers that the Holy Scriptures contain the entire counsel of God, including the area of civil life and governments? Or do we stand by and watch our civil liberty, the protection of person and property, homes, business, money, land, all which comprehend person and property, be surrendered to an unregenerated tyrant? We say a resounding no. Today, the true ideological origins of the American system of government have been largely obscured. The very source that fashioned it has long been forgotten or overlooked. The pages of secular history have dismembered the true roots of the American Republic. Now, I'm sure that there are many who would not even know that the origins of the American Republic lies ultimately in the laws of the ancient lawgiver himself, Moses, those precepts given at Mount Sinai, those eternal principles of truth, justice, and the sovereignty of God. You know, America was built on the platform provided by the Israeli Constitution, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. This was given by the ancient lawgiver Moses, as I said. While doing the monumental film over the past couple of years, we learned that the fundamental principles of our Constitution were based upon the Hebrew social system of organization. It appears that there was no other government during this time or before that relied on the concept of being truly under God. That was the key and made them so different, made Israel different, made America different, under God. The key to the American success story was the same story, under God. And that was the only sure and safe way to go. Obviously, there are many other systems of government, and they worshiped false gods, but Israel witnessed firsthand all the mighty deeds and miracles of God to keep them as a nation under God and in the worship of the only true God. God delivered them from slavery and made them a blessed nation, with their consent, of course, because he was their only sovereign king. Israel's very existence as a blessed nation was inseparable to its faith in God. They went hand in hand. Idolatry was forbidden and recognized for what it was, namely a terrible sin that greatly offended the one true triune God. Moses was so far advanced and different from all the other ancient lawgivers because he made Israel one nation under the one true God. and God's law, the Ten Commandments, the law of the land. God's law was the basis of the law for the Hebrew civil government. And God's higher law cannot change because it came from the unchangeable God. And God promised the people that wonderful blessings of prosperity would follow if they observed his law. But bad things would follow if the people did not follow God's law. What fascinated our founding fathers about ancient Israel, they knew that Israel came out of Egypt, and they were led by Moses, a man of great notoriety in his day. He had spent 40 years in the palace of the Pharaoh, and we know that he was being groomed to succeed the Pharaoh on the throne. However, an incident occurred involving Moses and the death of an Egyptian taskmaster. He had to flee, and he met Jethro, the spiritual leader of the Midianites. Moses married the daughter of Jethro and served him as a shepherd for the next 40 years of his life. And it was at the age of 80 years old that Moses received his mandate to lead Israel out of Egypt. Well, as time went around, Jethro came to meet Moses and to see how he was governing this large nation. Israel was no small tribal group. The book of Numbers shows us that those serving in the army were 600,000, and plus the women, who were probably at least as many as the men. It is estimated that Israel could have numbered at least 3 million people. The problem was that Moses had never been taught to govern such a large population. And except for the tyrant's law in Pharaoh's palace, where that was a different kind of system, definitely top down, Moses then learned how to organize his people under the people's law. Jethro was patient. He watched Moses struggle all day, wrestling with thousands of little trivia cases. People were lined up to see him all day long. And Moses said to his father-in-law, "They come to me, and I judge between one and another." He had the best intentions. But Jethro knew, and he said, "The thing that you're doing is not good. You're going to wear away, and they will wear away." Moses realized he couldn't do this anymore. It was totally wearing him out and wearing everybody else out. Now, Moses finally learned something here. And he said, "Take your wise men and understanding, the ones known among your tribes, and I will make them rulers over you." Notice that the people themselves were to take or choose from among themselves those who were best known for their wisdom and understanding, and then bring them to Moses for final approval. Now, here's where we see the model of a representative government begin, that America inherited. We will see how this model of a representative government began. We see 600,000 families into groups of 10 families each. Well, now we could see that there was a leader to be picked out of every 10 families. Now there were 60,000 newly elected leaders. And then he said, take these groups combined together in groups of 50 families. There you have it. Now there's another 12,000 elected leaders. And then he said the next step was to combine the above groups into combinations of 100 families. Now that gave him another 6,000 leaders. Finally, all those combinations were put together into groups of 1,000 families. Now that last group of leaders elected gave Moses 600 more leaders. of top caliber people to help govern Israel. Moses, with this new system of a representative government, found himself with over 78,000 elected leaders to help him administer the affairs of the people. This wonderful, strong, local self-government that America inherited came from Israel. This emphasis under this system was a strong local self-government. Now, only the greatest problems would go to Moses. As the record says, that the hard cases they brought to Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. This new system cured the problem of confusion and frustration among the people. A new system had begun in Israel. And what our founders learned from the people's law in Israel was amazing. First of all, they were set up as a commonwealth of free men. This whole emphasis of Israel's new system was reflected in the great proclamation, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." This proclamation was part of our great heritage, and it was emblazoned on what became known as the Liberty Bell. You've probably seen it if you ever went to Philadelphia. This great system of government that John Adams said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. This Constitution that we took from Israel reflected into our own Constitution. In fact, John Adams said it. He said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Samuel Adams added, he said, neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. Well, there you have it, folks. America was built upon a platform provided by the Israeli Constitution, given to us by the great lawgiver. But Moses offered the people a better option, equal rights, where the consent of the governed would actually form the government. And the Ten Commandments were to serve as the moral and civil laws of the society to all the people. There was not a separate set of laws for an elite few. The same fundamental rights belonged to all the citizens, and the laws were binding on all of them. Liberty was lived out in the political, economic, and religious spheres. The people were free to do all the good they could under God's law. Great things came out of this government that we see in our own government. There was a major emphasis on strong local self-government. Their system had an honest money supply, where gold and silver, according to the weight and strict requirement of honest weights and measures. We've gone away from that. Now we're printing money hand over fist. Land was looked upon as a private stewardship of the people, not the government. But now we see our government buying up a lot of land in America. The rights of property were protected in Israel. Well, in America now they want to tax and regulate and control all you do with your land. And the rights of life and private liberty were protected. But now in America, we kill unborn children. The rights of life and private liberty are not protected. You know, the leaders were selected by the consent of the majority of the people. Well, there's a lot of other great things that happened, but the main thrust of government was from the people upward. The government was required to operate according to principles of law, not the whims of some tyrant. Because this system expressed the will of the majority of the people, it allowed power to be transferred from one leader to another by peaceful means. That's why we have elections every 2, 4, and 6 years. So when the time came for the United States of America to adopt our Constitution, our founding fathers, they modeled it after the Israeli system of administration. America was built upon this system. You know, these great things, these same principles where common folk can acquire and own land and farms and homes and businesses. The free market was established and this wonderful system worked well, and there was no need for an overweening government telling us what we could do. So we see the citizens in their respective local areas owned the land and thus had control over the local government. In Israel, as in America, citizens had the opportunity to succeed because the free market drove the economy. Dignity was obvious. If any man will not work, he shall not eat. So an honest day's labor was an important element for the strong fabric that developed in society in both Israel and America. The people were to hold their representatives accountable to the protection of our God-given rights, not the limitation or the interpretation of them. And this is what politics ultimately is. It's about God. It's in the name of God, for the glory of God, for the advancement of the kingdom of God. And that's why our forefathers came here. And this is not why, unfortunately, most Americans vote today, for example. And that's not how they vote. You know, if you want to see this nation transform, you'll begin to see God in the voting booth with you. God will change these things in America, these bad things. Well, we could go on, but the truth that history reveals, the blessings and posterity, it serves notice to America and other nations throughout time. You respect the foundations as delineated in bold testaments of the Bible, all will be fine. If you don't, it will not be fine. Folks, our national existence of this great nation, Israel and America today, as a republic of free people, it's contingent on our national faith, faith in the Word of God. There's a striking parallel between our two systems of government. When the Hebrew Republic made its constitution from the hand of that inspired Hebrew lawgiver himself, it contained a provision that when the Israelites came into the promised land, it should be submitted to the people and then accepted by them in a formal way. You may have known the story. They were assembled in an amphitheater formed by two mountains, Ebal, a bleak, barren mountain on one side, and Gerizim, the beautiful mountain covered with verdure and beauty on the other. The one height, Gerizim, was a prophetic monument of the prosperity, the loveliness which would follow the observance of these institutions, the Ten Commandments. The other, Baal, of the desolation and pestilence which would follow if a disregard for the Constitution was made. And this would inevitably bring desolation and big problems upon the nation. There the tribes of Israel were arranged in order, and they listened to its provisions, and there they signaled their acceptance of it by an act of free will, binding upon them and their children and grandchildren's children forever. See, the power of the people was self-evident. It was great. The obvious resemblance between the Hebrew and American constitutions is very impressive. The fundamental principles are identical almost. And many of the details of organizations, as we talked about, are the same or very similar. The right of every person, from the head of the nation to the humblest stranger, were carefully protected. We even read in Scripture about a tyrant. Remember King Ahab? He would not even invade the field of the vine dresser. He knew, even though he was an evil king, he had some good qualities about him, and that was one. He knew that was private property of someone else. But his wicked wife, Jezebel, the queen, she perverted the law and justice. She had the man killed and seized his property. And we should note here that the laws proposed by God were approved and enacted by the people. God didn't force it upon them. And through their representatives in each state in Israel, every citizen was eligible to the highest position in government. The entire nation constituted a republic of free men. Property, social standing, care and protection of the government. The Hebrew government was essentially a system of self-government, a government of individual independence, city independence, state independence, subject only to a very limited central federal government. That was there to provide for general defense and promote general welfare. But a large, oppressive central government, with all its tentacles extending all over society, was forbidden. Local government looms out under the Mosaic Constitution, and the central government was very limited in proportion. Here is where the Hebrew Israeli constituted government resembles our own in the beginning. But it's very different from what other European nations and politics have somehow become to support, and were beginning to support a larger oppressive government. You know, back then, public opinion was a powerful element and gave strength to the people. We see in America, the Tea Party movement in America is a good example of the power of the voice of the people. You know, even if the people were wrong, the people had a say. And Samuel the prophet, he knew this all too well when unnecessary changes were made. When the people of Israel demanded a king, you know the story. God advised Samuel that the people were denying God, not Samuel. Samuel was against it, the Lord was against it, but the people willed it. The people decreed it, and so it was. James Russell Lowe said something very profound. He said this. He said, "Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. But the scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own." Liberty in Israel, as in America, was regulated by just and proper laws equal to all, and man was free to do all the good he could, more than in any other system of government the world has ever known before. As I said, the rights of personal property, respect to life, limb, health, reputation, they were all protected. Is it not interesting that in the midst of probably one of the most barbaric and dark times in the history of the world, when the earth's soil was drenched with blood, a legislator should found a government on principles of peace, justice, equality, humanity, liberty, social order carried out for the first time in human history. This is truly amazing. That supernatural revelation was given to the great lawgiver himself. Now, whoever believes that a representative government is a form of government stamped with the goodness of divine approbation, cherishes that, defends its charter for our own and our children's liberty. Just imagine for a moment if all the leaders in Israel and America over all time were gathered into one vast Congress, and the great Jewish lawgiver himself, Moses, appeared in their midst. He might say, "Gentlemen, I broke down the doors of Pharaoh's house in bondage and proclaimed liberty among the men. I prefer peace to war, happiness. My efforts have always been to protect individuals' enjoyment of their labor and life for the whole commonwealth of your nation. No other legislator in the world has ever shown the stranger equal justice, equal tenderness, and spontaneous compassion. Under Moses, compassion was combustionable. Moses would say, 'Laws, not men, were the rulers of my republic. Consent, not force, the basis of my government. I recognize the happiness and well-being of the people as the one supreme law of political liberty. And by the institutions founded on these principles, a new charter was made with my fellow man. Onward, gentlemen, without fear in the doctrine of God, in those great principles, free, equal government taught by the divine Spirit.'" See, this Israeli constitution, this Hebrew constitution from Moses, it speaks to us today from this distant age in the past, down through the channels of time, in a spirit of compassion. And it's filled with faith, hope, and charity. Now, there are some today who are doubting. I understand that. They're doubting the capacity of the people of America for self-government. But for me, I have no such fear. My faith is still in our constitutions, and they will work. It's based on the premise that the essential principles are identical, very close, with the political system that emanated from divine wisdom, established by the sovereign authority of the world himself. Men are capable of governing themselves, and then, and only then, will tyranny have an appointment with God. This is the better future to comprehend. It's not a tree planted by human hands, sowed in sunshine, grown in vernal breezes and gentle rain that make its roots deep. But through the hand of God himself, the mustard seed shall become a tree. Liberty, law, science, and the Judeo-Christian faith shall triumph. Ultimately, the government is upon the shoulders of Christ. See, there can never be real peace in history outside of Christ. There can be temporary ceasefire agreements, but never a lasting peace. When Christians understand that peace comes by the gospel and discipling the nations, we will get it. But frankly, until the return of Christ and the removal of evil from the world, good men in a free nation will need use of some national defense to restrain violent, aggressive threats and acts. Well, thanks be to God for His promises that will span the nations of the world, and in time will reveal heaven's perspective in His perfect timing.